Welcome to this latest edition in our video interview series here at iConnect. My name is Richard Albert, and along with Tom Ginsberg and David Landau, I'm a founding co-editor of this blog. And today we're going to feature Jill Goldenziel in our 5-question series here at iConnect. 5 questions that we ask to a scholar of public law. Jill Goldenziel is an associate professor at Marine Corps University, Command and Staff College. Also a dear friend. Jill, it's so good to see you. And I have to say, I love the backdrop, which I understand is not a virtual backdrop. That's real life.
No, this is actually my yard, Richard. Thank you so much for having me. This is my yard, and I did not know it could be so lush right outside of Washington, D.C. until I actually moved here. We never knew we wanted a yard like this until we came here, and then we thought, well, we have Zen right outside our door, so this is fantastic.
Beautiful, beautiful. So Jill, as you know, the purpose of this 5-question series is to introduce you to some of the scholars who read our blog, who watch our blog, who may not yet have encountered you. So I have questions about what you work on, about also how you work, and also about your academic journey to this point. So if it's okay, I'll just dive into the first question, which is, what are you working on right now, researching and writing?
So I'm working on a book, first of all, about how politicization of refugee and migration crises harms national security. And I'm looking at not just what we've all heard about in recent years with the Muslim ban, the refugee ban, and how that's affected our national security, our ability to work with partners and allies abroad who may then wish to be admitted to the US in exchange for that if they're, say, persecuted by adversary parties for working with US forces. But I'm also looking historically at how some controversial decisions related to immigration into the US have impacted our national security negatively, going back really, I'd say, over the last at least 100 years. And I'm also working on a number of projects related to lawfare. So I have an article coming out in the fall in the Cornell Law Review on how international law is being used by the US's adversaries against us. It's called Law as a Battlefield, the US, China, and the Global Escalation of Lawfare. And that grew out of a broader project, which was funded out of the Department of Defense's Minerva initiative on international law as the weapon of the weak, how small states are using international law to combat great powers. And so I've coded with a wonderful team of research assistants from several universities in the area, and what I'm continuing to work with now from the University of Virginia, coded all of the cases from the International Court of Justice and several other international courts. And I'm looking at, well, who's using these international courts? Who's filing cases? Why? And under what conditions are they likely to succeed or not succeed, and on what topics? So this together, along with a project on reforming intelligence law, which I've been talking to with some of your colleagues at Texas, I'm talking with some of them about that. That's occupying a lot of my brain space this summer.
That's a huge research agenda. I have many questions to ask about them, but in the interest of time, let me just ask one. What's an example of a small state using international law as a weapon?
So I first really became interested in this topic because of the Philippines-China arbitration, which came down in 2016. And essentially what had been happening and what is still happening in many ways is the Philippines have islands off of the larger islands in the South China Sea that China is claiming as their own, or features, what's known as features under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea that China is claiming. And what China had been doing was harassing Filipino fishermen who were fishing around these features as their families had done for centuries, and in some cases actually building islands, man-made islands on top of some of these features. And in the process, destroying a lot of environmental life. And then they were saying they weren't militarizing these islands, but these islands had radomes, they had runways, they had basically everything except an actual military presence. They could be militarized at any moment. So the Philippines can't challenge China militarily in any really meaningful way without our assistance. it is contested, I'll say, whether the U.S. treaty obligations to the Philippines would apply. Most people would say no in the current U.S. government, but I'm not sure that a position has been taken officially on that. What did the Philippines do? They went to court and they filed an arbitration against China and won in a sweeping decision in 2016. And it's not entirely clear what the effects of this decision have been. China has backed off on a few things. They have certainly not backed on everything that they have done that the Philippines cited in their complaint. And around the same time that the arbitration came down, Philippines elected a president who is, of course, less friendly to the United States. So it's not entirely clear what the long-term effects of this decision are going to be. But the fact that the case came up at all and that China reacted as strongly against it as it did, which included non-participation in the case, but then some things that looked suspiciously like they were participating in the case, and the media backlash they had against it, says to me, well, this has a lot of importance, even if the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague doesn't have an army to actually enforce the decision, regardless of what politics are occurring around it right now.
Okay, that's a helpful illustration. Thank you. So Jill, you're working on one project about refugees and American international security, another on lawfare, another on reforming intelligence, perhaps intelligence gathering, intelligence surveillance, that entire world. And then a fourth project on the weaponization of international law. A lot of balls to juggle. How do you write? Do you have a routine that you keep every day? Do you just write whenever the time appears in your busy schedule? How do you go about doing your research and writing?
I think I've tried all of those methods, and I'm still trying to figure out which one works best, because no one works best at any given time. So nobody planned for writing in the current situation that we're in, when we have, in my family, 2 working parents and 2 kids who are in school at home that we need to be monitoring at given times. So I prefer to work in I'm going to put aside blocks of time, really for a week or a month at a time, and I'm going to focus on one particular project. That I don't think has happened since I had children. So what happens much more often now is I try to find blocks that I can take. And I try to find blocks where, at least even if I am not actually sitting down and writing, I'm making notes, or I'm reading something, or I'm having a conversation about the article. Maybe this will count for tonight. I don't know. It depends what kinds of questions you ask me. But something that I can go to my journal at the end of the day and say, I did X to progress toward goal Y, then I feel like I've at least gotten somewhere. And once I eventually have enough of that, then at some point I do have to put the pedal to the metal and have those solid blocks of time. And sometimes they come at odd hours of the morning. But the learning to write in blocks of time over time has been really critical, especially when I have more people now, between research assistants and co-authors and co-workers who are ages 6 and 9, interrupting my day than ever before. Making sure that I can work in those blocks of time has been really key.
Okay, well, that's helpful. It's helpful to know how you and others are managing in this present public health emergency, because we continue to write. But it certainly is probably not the priority that it once was before. We have to juggle so many different things. So Jill, you've told us about what you're working on. You've told us a bit about how you do your work in research. When did you know that this is the life that you wanted to build for yourself, that you wanted to be a scholar?
So I went to Princeton, which I'm been talking a lot about recently because my intellectual worlds have very much come together in recent days. And at Princeton, when I was there in the politics department, we had to write 2 pieces of junior independent work. So one in the fall and one in the spring, and they each had to be a 20 to 25 page paper. And we had classes involved where they weren't graded, but where we really learned to write that kind of paper and met in small groups and discussed our topics. And I wrote about law and religion. So it was during that process that I realized, wait a minute, I'm a fourth generation lawyer, but there's something else that I also love. I want to write law related things because I'm writing this and it's supposed to be 25 pages and it's turning out to be 50 pages. And my professor says it's good and tells me to keep going. And I want to be able to explore these topics in a deep way. I'm getting encouragement to do it. And then not only that, but this particular professor, who I have run into since, and gotten to mentor her own students, which is really wonderful as well. She was a young female professor, which in the field of international relations, 20 to 25% of about 25% of the tenured and tenure track professors were female. So it was rare to have a professor who was then on the path to that category. But also I showed up in her office late at night because she had office hours, she had nighttime office hours, and her newborn was sleeping there. And she was a little embarrassed about it. And I thought, this is great. Like, this is actually really great because what you're showing me is that I can do this, right? That there is a path for me in this field as somebody who wants to be connected to the real world. Her work is also very, very connected to the real world, who wants to be in a field where traditionally there aren't a lot of women, and who wants to be a parent. I hope that my child isn't sleeping in my office hours, but you're also showing me that there is a way to balance work and life and that nobody's criticizing you for doing this. And the baby was really cute too. So, so we put all of these things together, and suddenly at 8 o'clock at night in someone's office hours, I had this eureka moment and said, all right, this is my future. And it was. I did. My children, actually, they gave diplomas to the kids who were born en route to the Harvard PhD at my Harvard PhD graduation. So my oldest has a diploma, and I always felt a little bad for my younger one because he was just a few months short. He was under my robe at the time of my graduation. And so, yes, I never actually had to bring my children to office hours, but I did bring them into the office and was encouraged to do so because people wanted to meet them. So,
well, that's a nice touch that that Harvard, I think, gave the graduates and their families. Very, very nice touch. My light has actually come off, so I'm going to ask you a question, and then as you answer, I'm going to walk over and turn the light back on, and I'll be right back. But the question I now want to ask you: you've told us about what you're researching and writing. You've told us about how you write. You've told us about what kind of led to your interest in becoming a scholar and having that as a career. I want to stay in the time that you were a student, whether as an undergraduate or a law student or a doctoral student. Was there a book that you encountered at the time, or a chapter or a paper, something you read that really hit you hard in a good way, that continues today to inform how you think about things, how you approach your scholarship? Is there such a publication that you can tell us about?
If I were to cite one piece that made me want to become a political scientist, it was Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. And the article came out, I believe, before the book in the Atlantic. I think of the article first, although I think I may have seen something in pre-publication because he was not at Princeton, but a lot of people certainly knew his work. Everybody know who doesn't know Robert Putnam's work, really. But it really made me think about, maybe learn about the concept of civil society for the first time and the role and its importance it plays in American politics. And I think an unsung role. I mean, as much as we've seen build on Putnam's work since, I think we're really seeing now in US politics how much faith we had in norms versus law. and how we haven't really had a public discussion, a necessary public discussion about what norms are and what role that civilians and civil society needs to play in upholding those norms. And then there's a huge civil military relations piece of this as well that I'm beginning to talk about and think about more also.
Yes, of course. Putnam, Bowling Alone. Great, great, great. Final question. You're very busy. I just have one more, and then I'll let you go. We've talked about the work of others. What about your work? Is there a book, a publication, maybe your book in progress, maybe a chapter, maybe a paper you've written that you hold most dear, that is really your most meaningful so far? And I ask because I'd love to share a link to whatever publication you choose for our readers to go and read, so they learn more about you and your work. I can answer the question from my perspective because I remember, Jill, in 2012, I was involved in a group and we awarded a prize to the best paper. And it was your paper that won the prize, Veiled Political Question, one of my favorite papers written by you that I still, no, absolutely, it's true, 2012, it's a great paper, a prize-winning paper. Is there a publication that you hold out as your most important, most meaningful? Because again, I want to share this with our readers and viewers.
I would have to say, as much I love that one. I love them all. I mean, they all came from passion. I'm lucky to get to write about things that I'm really, really passionate about. But the one that is probably most meaningful to me is still Displaced, a proposal for a new international agreement to protect refugees, migrants, and states. And that really, I mean, it is, the title says what it is. It was my proposal for a new international agreement to go beyond international refugee law and protect people who fall not just into the five narrow categories that that fall under the term refugee in international law: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, membership in a particular social group, but to go beyond that and protect more broadly people fleeing war and violence, and have the international community come together and say, the mass displacement of these people is harming international security. Therefore, we as the international community need to come together and share responsibility and protect them. And it's that work was, in a series of steps of it getting noticed, was what caused me to be able to then represent the academic council and the UN system at the negotiations for the Global Compact on Migration, Global Compact for Migration, excuse me, at the UN. And that I got to represent them in the negotiations process, be involved in high-level meetings, participate in the summit for the UN Summit for Refugees and Migrants in 2016, submit draft language for the Declaration on Refugees and Migrants, and then eventually speak beside Angela Merkel and other world leaders at the summit to adopt the Global Compact for Migration in Marrakesh in 2018, excuse me. And that was just, I always wanted to be an academic whose work was relevant in the real world. And I wrote this, and my mentor really had to push me to write it, because he said, "You've told us everything that's wrong about the international refugee regime. Now, what should we do?" And I said, "I can't write that." He said, "Yes, you can." I said, "But nobody's going to read it. Nobody's going to be interested in this crazy ivory tower thing. Maybe I should just write something else." And he pushed me to do it, and I did it. And then I got to actually work on it I mean, of course, it's not, the Global Compact for Migration is not my proposal wholesale, and it shouldn't be, because international agreements only work if states negotiate them. But the fact that I even got to be there and be part of that process and have my work influence the conversation at all is just a dream. And now I have to go on and top it. Keep working on that. So hopefully you'll be hearing a lot about lawfare, more about lawfare and improved refugee policy in the US soon.
Well, Jill Goldenziel, I think the smart money is that you will be able to top it.
Thank you.
So, Jill, thanks for agreeing to do this. Jill Goldenziel, Associate Professor at Marine Corps University Command and Staff College. You will send me the link to this proposal so that I can share it with our readers and our viewers. Thanks for making time to do this. We know how many balls you're juggling, not only work-wise, but family-wise, personal-wise, a lot going on. Thanks for making time to do this, and
Thank you for
stay
having me.
safe.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.